I'm Isabel Grant, 36 years old. And until 3 months ago, I thought I had a decent life. Not perfect, mind you. Whose is, but decent. A freelance copywriting career that kept the bills paid. A 4-year-old son named Ben who could make me laugh even on my worst days. And a husband who seemed reliable enough. Ethan Grant, 40 years old, project manager at Ravencore Industries. The kind of man who wore pressed khakis on weekends and never forgot to floss. He texted me right as I was holding Ben's hand, walking into Little Sprouts daycare. Moved to Barcelona with Sylvie, already withdrew all our savings. Good luck with the rent. I stood frozen on the sidewalk while Ben tugged at my jacket, giggling about something a classmate had said. $22,000. Gone. Our entire safety net vanished with a single text message sent from another continent. The thing is, I could have forgiven him. I'm the type who forgives too easily, who makes excuses for people who don't deserve them. But Ethan made one critical mistake. He underestimated exactly how dangerous a woman becomes when she's got nothing left to lose. The first few days blurred together in a haze of shock and logistics. Ben kept asking where Daddy was, and I kept giving him vague answers about work trips while my mind raced through immediate concerns. Rent was due in 2 weeks. The daycare bill was already overdue. My laptop was making that concerning grinding noise that meant I'd need to replace it soon. And that was before I learned about the divorce papers. They arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning, filed in Barcelona under Spanish law. Ethan had done his research. International divorce proceedings are complex, expensive, and heavily favor the spouse who files first. He'd covered his bases, all right. Resignation letter submitted to Ravencore 3 weeks earlier. Spanish immigration approval dated 2 months back. Bank account transfers that had been trickling out of our joint savings for the past 6 weeks. This wasn't an impulsive decision. This was a calculated extraction. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how meticulously he'd planned it while I was living my normal life, making grocery lists and scheduling Ben's dental appointments, while I was researching summer camps and worrying about whether we needed a new water heater. Ethan was orchestrating his escape with the precision of a military operation. Sylvie Harper, 28 years old, hired as Ethan's personal assistant 7 months ago. Auburn hair, designer handbags, and the kind of smile that made client meetings run smoother. I'd met her exactly twice. Once at the company Christmas party where she'd complimented my earrings, and once when she'd stopped by our house to drop off documents. She'd been perfectly polite, even asked about Ben's preschool application process. The documents I found later told a different story. Email threads discussing apartment viewings in Barcelona's Gothic quarter. Flight confirmations for 2 passengers. Even a restaurant reservation for Valentine's Day. Not the one Ethan had supposedly spent working late at the office. I might have suspected something if I'd been looking for it, but I'd been busy with my own work, managing deadlines for 3 different clients while trying to potty train Ben and handle the million small crises that make up daily life. The signs were probably there, but I'd been too overwhelmed to connect them. The realization hit me hardest at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, when I was lying awake doing math in my head. Even with my freelance income, I couldn't cover our expenses alone. The house payment, utilities, groceries, Ben's daycare, health insurance, it all added up to more than I could manage, even working 60-hour weeks. That's when I started getting angry. Really angry. Not the quick flash of rage that comes with sudden bad news, but the slow, steady burn that builds when you realize how thoroughly you've been played. I called Diana Rowe the next morning. We'd worked together at Morrison & Associates 5 years earlier, before I'd gone freelance and she'd moved into family law. Diana had always been the sharpest person in any room, with an instinct for finding the weak spots in opposing arguments. "Let me get this straight," she said, leaning back in her office chair. "He filed for divorce in Spain, withdrew your joint savings, and you're telling me this was all a surprise?" "Complete surprise. I thought our marriage was solid. Not perfect, but solid." Diana pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "When did you last see bank statements?" "We had online banking. He handled most of the financial stuff." "Credit cards?" "Joint account. He paid the bills. Isabel. Diana's voice was gentle, but firm. This level of financial secrecy suggests he's been planning this for months, maybe longer, which means there might be other assets you don't know about. That's when it occurred to me that I'd been living with a stranger. Not just because of the affair, but because of how little I actually knew about our financial situation. I'd trusted him completely. And he'd used that trust to methodically dismantle our life together. Diana walked me through the discovery process. We'd need bank records, employment records, tax returns, any documentation of assets or debts. Most important, we'd need to establish a timeline of when he'd started moving money around. Here's what bothers me, Diana said. International divorce filings are expensive. Spanish immigration requires proof of substantial assets. Your husband would need significantly more than $22,000 to establish residency there. What are you saying? I'm saying he's got money you don't know about. And if he's been hiding assets during divorce proceedings, that's a serious legal problem. We spent the next 2 weeks building a financial profile of my marriage. It was like excavating an archaeological site, layer by layer, each discovery more disturbing than the last. Ethan had opened a separate checking account 18 months earlier. Not secret, exactly, my name was on the account, but he'd never mentioned it. And the statements went to his office. Monthly deposits ranging from $500 to $2,000, all sourced from our joint account. Over 18 months, he'd accumulated nearly $40,000 I didn't know existed. There were investment accounts, too. A portfolio with Morgan Stanley that showed steady contributions over the past 2 years. Again, technically joint accounts. But I'd never seen statements or been consulted about investment decisions. The most damning evidence was in his laptop. Ethan had been careless about clearing his browser history, and Diana's IT specialist was able to recover deleted files from the hard drive. What we found painted a picture of a man who'd been planning his exit strategy for almost 3 years. Apartment rental websites in Barcelona. Favorited and bookmarked. Currency exchange calculators showing dollar to euro conversions. Even a spreadsheet labeled Transition Timeline with dates, tasks, and budget projections. But it was the email drafts that really got to me. Messages to his mother, Margot, discussing the logistics of separating from Isabel and the importance of securing adequate funding for the transition. References to my instability and difficulty adapting to change. One draft, dated 6 months earlier, was particularly brutal. Isabel has become increasingly dependent and demanding. The marriage has become a barrier to professional growth and personal fulfillment. I believe a clean break would be in everyone's best interest, including Ben's. I'd never seen this side of Ethan. The clinical detachment, the way he reduced our entire relationship to a cost-benefit analysis. This wasn't the man I'd married, the one who'd cried at Ben's birth and spent hours assembling his first bicycle. Or maybe it was exactly who he'd always been, and I'd just been too naive to see it. Diana filed our response to the divorce petition in New York, where we'd been married and established residency. International divorce law is complicated, but the key principle is protecting the interests of any minor children. Since Ben was an American citizen living in New York, we had grounds to contest the Spanish filing. More importantly, we had grounds to freeze the assets Ethan had been hiding. The restraining order was signed on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, every account with Ethan's name on it was frozen pending a full financial disclosure. His Spanish immigration application was flagged for investigation. The Barcelona apartment lease was voided due to suspicious funding sources. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt exhausted. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would unfold. At 36, I was supposed to be figuring out school districts and family vacation destinations, not hiring forensic accountants and private investigators. But I was also discovering something about myself. I was stronger than I'd realized, more resourceful, more willing to fight for what mattered. That's when Sylvie called. It was a Tuesday evening, around 9 o'clock. Ben was asleep, and I was working on a client project, trying to maintain some semblance of normal productivity. The phone rang, and I almost didn't answer. Unknown international number. Isabel, this is Sylvie Harper. I think we need to talk. My first instinct was to hang up. This was the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage, who'd been sharing my husband's bed while I was reading bedtime stories to our son. But something in her voice stopped me. She sounded scared. I'm listening, I said. Ethan lied to me about everything, the divorce, the money, the timeline. He told me you'd been separated for over a year, that the divorce was already in progress. I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. What truth? That you had no idea. That he was planning to take Ben away from you. That he's been embezzling money from Ravencore. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Sylvie had discovered that Ethan had been falsifying expense reports, billing personal expenses to client accounts, and skimming money from project budgets. She'd also learned about the Swiss bank account he'd opened without telling her, and the second apartment he'd been renting in Barcelona's financial district. He's not the man I thought he was, Sylvie said. And I'm not the kind of person who helps someone destroy a family. She offered to provide documentation, bank records, email correspondence, even audio recordings of conversations where Ethan had discussed his plans for gaining full custody of Ben. In exchange, she wanted protection from potential legal consequences and a promise that her cooperation would remain confidential. Diana was skeptical. This could be a trap. Maybe they're working together to manipulate you into dropping the asset freeze. But I didn't think so. Sylvie's information was too specific, too damaging to Ethan's case. She provided details about Ravencore's internal auditing process, about meetings with Spanish immigration attorneys, about Ethan's plan to claim I was an unfit mother based on my history of postpartum depression. The postpartum depression angle was particularly insidious. Yes, I'd struggled after Ben's birth. Yes, I'd seen a therapist and taken medication for several months, but I'd recovered completely. And there was no indication that my mental health had ever impacted my ability to care for Ben. Ethan knew this. He'd been there through the worst of it, had seen me work with healthcare providers to get the support I needed. He'd praised my strength and resilience. Now he was planning to weaponize the most vulnerable period of my life against me. That's when I stopped feeling guilty about destroying his carefully constructed new life. Diana used Sylvie's information to build a comprehensive case for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming. Ethan had been systematically stealing from his employer while planning to relocate to a country without extradition treaties for financial crimes. The custody aspect was equally strong. His plan to claim I was mentally unfit was based on selectively edited medical records and testimonials from people who'd never met me. Diana found email exchanges between Ethan and his mother discussing the importance of establishing Isabel's incompetence and ensuring Ben's placement in a stable European environment. The restraining order was expanded to include international travel restrictions. Ethan couldn't leave Spain without court approval, and any attempt to contact me or Ben would result in immediate arrest. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought he'd stay in Barcelona, lick his wounds, and try to build a new life with whatever resources he had left. I was wrong. Ethan flew back to New York on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the restraining order was filed. Airport security was waiting for him with a court summons and a very detailed explanation of his legal situation. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Diana had prepared extensively, organizing evidence into binders, preparing witness testimonies, and coordinating with the district attorney's office regarding the embezzlement charges. I'd never been in a courtroom before. It was smaller than I'd expected, more mundane, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and the kind of carpet you'd find in any office building. But there was something about the formality of it, the weight of legal process, that made everything feel more serious. Ethan looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled suit, dark circles under his eyes. This wasn't the confident, well-groomed man I'd married. This was someone who'd been backed into a corner and was running out of options. His lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Mitchell Ross, did his best with a terrible case. He argued that Ethan's actions were the result of a midlife crisis and poor judgment, rather than criminal intent. He claimed the asset transfers were marital property redistributions rather than theft. Diana methodically dismantled each argument. She presented bank records showing systematic embezzlement from Ravencore accounts. She played audio recordings of Ethan discussing his plan to claim I was mentally unfit. She showed emails between Ethan and his mother detailing their strategy for gaining custody of Ben. The most damaging evidence was a recording Sylvie had made of a conversation where Ethan explicitly stated his intention to eliminate Isabel's parental rights and ensure she never sees Ben again. Judge Patricia Hernandez was not impressed. A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you want to confess your sins. She listened to 3 hours of testimony with increasing irritation. "Mr. Grant," she said finally, "you've presented this court with evidence of systematic financial fraud, attempted child abduction, and what appears to be a conspiracy to deny your son's mother her legal rights. These are serious criminal charges, not civil disputes." The ruling was swift and comprehensive. All assets were to be returned to joint control pending full financial disclosure. Ethan's visitation rights were suspended pending a psychological evaluation. The Spanish immigration application was declared fraudulent and reported to international authorities. Most importantly, custody of Ben was awarded to me with no visitation rights for Ethan until he completed court-ordered counseling and demonstrated financial stability. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt drained. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to end. I'd never intended to destroy Ethan's life completely. I just wanted to protect my son and secure our future. But Ethan had made the choice to escalate things. He'd turned our divorce into a war. And wars have casualties. The fallout was swift and brutal. Ravencore fired him immediately and filed criminal charges for embezzlement. The story made the local news. Local executive accused of stealing from company to fund international affair. His professional reputation was destroyed overnight. Margot Grant, Ethan's mother, faced her own consequences. Her involvement in the custody scheme cost her a position on the board of directors for a major charitable foundation. The emails Diana had obtained showed her discussing financial incentives for character witnesses and strategies for discrediting Isabel's mental health history. The Swiss bank account was frozen by international authorities. The Barcelona apartment was seized by Spanish police as part of a money laundering investigation. Even Ethan's passport was confiscated pending resolution of the criminal charges. Within 6 weeks, the man who'd thought he was clever enough to orchestrate the perfect escape had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his money, and his son. I felt sorry for him. Not enough to regret my actions, but enough to recognize that this outcome was more severe than I'd originally intended. I'd wanted justice, not total destruction. But Ethan had chosen to make this a zero-sum game. He'd tried to take everything from me: my son, my financial security, my reputation, my future. I'd simply returned the favor. The house felt different after the court ruling, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. Ben seemed more relaxed too, though he was still too young to understand the legal complexities of what had happened. I started getting freelance work again, real assignments from clients who trusted my abilities. The stress of the divorce proceedings had been affecting my creativity, but with the uncertainty resolved, I found myself producing better work than I had in years. Diana suggested I consider changing careers. "You've got excellent instincts for legal research," she said. "Have you ever thought about law school?" I hadn't, but the idea was appealing. I'd discovered skills I didn't know I possessed: the ability to analyze complex documents, to think strategically about legal problems, to remain calm under pressure. Maybe there was a future in that. Rising Tide Communications reached out to me in late spring. They were a mid-sized agency in Portland, Maine, specializing in nonprofit and social justice campaigns. They'd seen my work and were looking for a creative director. The position would mean relocating. But that didn't seem like a bad thing. Ben and I needed a fresh start, somewhere without the weight of recent history. The salary was good, the benefits were excellent, and the work aligned with my values. We found a small house near the ocean, close enough to hear the waves at night, but far enough from the tourist areas to be affordable. Ben loved the beach, spent hours collecting shells and building sand castles. I loved the sense of possibility that came with a new place, new people, new challenges. Sylvie sent a brief email in June, letting me know she'd returned to France and was working for a consulting firm in Lyon. She thanked me for not pressing charges and wished Ben and me well. I wrote back, thanking her for her cooperation and hoping she'd found the peace she was looking for. I never heard from her again, which was probably for the best. We'd been allies in extraordinary circumstances, but we weren't friends. Too much had happened for a normal relationship to be possible. The email from Ethan arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, almost 4 months after the court ruling. It was long, rambling, and full of justifications. He blamed his actions on work stress, midlife crisis, and the deterioration of our emotional connection. He claimed he'd never intended to hurt me or Ben, that his plan had been to create a situation where everyone could be happy. The message ended with a request. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but Ben is my son too. Can we find a way to move forward that allows me to be part of his life? I stared at the email for a long time, trying to decide how to respond. Part of me felt sorry for him. He'd lost everything, and the consequences of his actions would follow him for years. But another part of me remembered the audio recordings, the systematic deception, the deliberate cruelty of his plan. I thought about Ben, who was currently in the backyard building a fort out of driftwood and beach grass. He'd stopped asking about his father weeks ago. When other kids talked about their dads, Ben would sometimes mention that his daddy lived far away. But he didn't seem particularly sad about it. Children are resilient, but they're also perceptive. Ben had sensed the tension in our house before Ethan left, had picked up on the undercurrents of conflict even when we'd thought we were hiding them. Since the divorce, he'd been calmer, more secure, more willing to explore and take risks. I drafted several responses to Ethan's email. Some were angry, some were conciliatory, some were coldly professional. In the end, I deleted them all and wrote a single sentence. Ben drew a family portrait yesterday. You weren't in it. That was 3 months ago. I haven't heard from Ethan since. Ben starts kindergarten next month. He's excited about making new friends, learning to read, and showing his teacher his shell collection. Sometimes he asks about his father, but the questions are becoming less frequent and more matter of fact. I've started dating again, carefully and slowly. Nothing serious yet. But it's nice to remember that I'm more than just a mother and a survivor. I'm a woman with interests and attractions and the capacity for new relationships. The legal issues are mostly resolved. Ethan served 6 months in minimum security prison for embezzlement and was released on probation. He's working as a night security guard in Queens, living in a studio apartment, and struggling to pay restitution to Ravencore. His mother moved to Florida after the scandal broke. She sends birthday cards to Ben, but hasn't attempted any other contact. I think she's ashamed of her role in the custody scheme, and rightly so. I've learned things about myself through all of this. I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm more resourceful. I'm capable of strategic thinking and decisive action when the stakes are high enough. I've also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I don't hate Ethan anymore, but I don't trust him either. He made choices that revealed his true character, and those choices have consequences that extend far beyond legal penalties. Most importantly, I've learned that I don't need someone else to complete my life. Ben and I are a family, a small but complete unit. We have our routines, our inside jokes, our shared adventures. We have enough. That doesn't mean I'm opposed to letting someone else into our lives eventually. But it would have to be someone who enhances what we already have, not someone who tries to replace or overshadow it. I think about the woman I was 18 months ago, the one who trusted completely and questioned nothing. She seems like a stranger now, not in a bad way, but in the way that growth always makes previous versions of ourselves seem limited. The woman I am now asks questions. She reads the fine print. She maintains her own bank account and her own credit cards. She knows her legal rights and isn't afraid to enforce them. She's also kinder, more empathetic to other people's struggles. Going through a crisis teaches you things about human nature, both its capacity for cruelty and its potential for resilience. I understand now why some people make terrible choices when they're desperate or afraid. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, but it does mean approaching life with more nuance and less judgment. Ben is calling me from the backyard. He's found a piece of sea glass and wants to add it to his collection. In a few minutes, I'll go outside and admire his treasure. And we'll talk about how storms can turn broken glass into something beautiful. It's a good metaphor for what's happened to us. We were broken, but we've been polished by the experience. We're not the same as we were before, but we're not worse either. We're different, stronger, more ourselves than we've ever been. Ethan thought he was writing the ending to our story when he sent that text message from Barcelona. But he was wrong. He was just writing the beginning of a new chapter, one where Ben and I are the heroes of our own lives.